Winston Churchill, the renowned war hero, once said, "If you're going through hell, keep going." This was certainly a sentiment shared by my uncle, an astute, career-oriented, and hard-working lawyer who was loved and respected by everyone. Yet with this perfect image he embodied came a set of problems that were completely ignored by those around him. As a child, I would often hear him launch into hours worth of complaints and grumbles about his profession. Yet no one batted an eye. No one listened to him. No one lent him the desperate support that he needed. So, when he was diagnosed with clinical depression, everyone in our family was left speechless as they scratched their heads in confusion. Yet I wasn't surprised at all, not one bit. But this situation isn't uncommon by any means. In fact, a 2023 study conducted in California and DC found that a staggering 66% of lawyers reported that their job severely impacted their mental health. 46% said they like to quit their job due to stress and burnout. And 9% said that they'd be better off dead. The facts and figures don't lie, and it's clear that this problem needs more representation, and more importantly, concrete solutions. But what is it exactly that leads to this mental health epidemic of unparalleled scale? Well, my uncle's mental health issues consisted of several problems, ranging from long working hours, to stress, to burnout, and even anxiety. Yet the bigger and more concerning problem with all of this was his stubbornness to accept help. In every situation that he was in, he always refused to accept the help that is available. But then again, this isn't something uncommon by any means. In fact, it was reported by the American Bar Association in 2016 that a minuscule 7% of lawyers use the mental health services available to them. But why is this exactly? Well, my uncle always said that he viewed his pristine perception above all else in his life, even at the cost of his own state of mind. And here lies the crux of the issue, impacting the majority of modern legal professionals: social stigma. The societal perception that we've developed of lawyers being these infallible paragons of strength and intelligence has created an environment in which admitting that you need help is seen as some sort of vulnerability or weakness. The popular expectation is to just endure and to accommodate to that stress, because to quote my uncle, that's what lawyers do. And it is precisely this dangerous line of thinking that leads to that concerning 9% of people who said that they'd be better off dead. Yet there's more to this issue than what meets the eye. In fact, while most people have at least heard of social stigma at least once in their lives, and the idea of lawyers being victims of said social stigma, or even stress or burnout, is quite common amongst mental health activists, the more pressing issues are always ignored. And it is because of ignoring them that we see that key 66% of respondents that said their job negatively impacted their mental health. That statistic that I brought up earlier. But before I get ahead of myself, what are these pressing issues that I'm talking about exactly? Well, the cold hard truth is that lawyers are not just victims of social stigma. They're also victims of the faults of the systems that they dedicate their lives towards. What do I mean by this exactly? Well, a unique perspective that my uncle frequently shared with me was about how his clients often had unreasonable expectations of him, expectations that were severe, harsh, and that he had a difficulty to meet. Whenever he was representing a client in court, he was always expected to deliver some sort of results, and there was this subtle pressure placed on him to make sure that verdicts were decided in his favor. After all, wasn't that why he was getting paid in the first place? In the legal industry, this is referred to as client pressure. And while it's not really talked about in society much, the negative impacts it leaves behind cannot be understated. So, what do I mean by all this? Well, firstly, I like to point out how in 2016, the American Bar Association conducted a study that found a staggering 90% of lawyers stated client pressure to be the chief cause of experiencing high levels of stress. But hold on, Why are they even experiencing this stress in the first place? Well, we often think that lawyers have some sort of duty to their clients to ensure that good results are delivered and that verdicts are decided in their favor. But when getting caught up in this mess of expectations and demands, we never stop to think about the individuals themselves, that being the lawyers. We never stop to think about the complexities of a case or the difficulty in attaining a certain verdict. We never think about what happens when we pile on several rigid expectations and demands onto someone and how it may impact them negatively until we finally see it with our own eyes. And it is precisely this that leads to that 90% of people who said that client pressure was the chief cause of their high levels of stress. However, this isn't the end of the issues that plague modern legal professionals. And there are so many things that are considered norms in the legal world that must be given a closer look. My uncle often said that personal dilemmas and ethical constraints often hampered him during his work. In fact, I'd like to ask you a question. Have you ever experienced a time during your work where you felt personally conflicted or morally conflicted by your actions? Perhaps you have, perhaps you have not. But it is certainly something that does exist within our society, and something that my uncle knows all too well. But what do I mean by this exactly? Well, he often said that his work made him feel immoral, and at times, he felt unimaginable levels of stress and guilt. And once again, he wasn't alone in dealing with this. In fact, the International Bar Association conducted a study which found 69% of lawyers are negatively impacted by ethical dilemmas. But why is this? Well, navigating ethical dilemmas is often so omnipresent, especially within the legal career, yet they're never talked about. Why so? And what impact does it have? Well, my uncle always said that he had to represent clients that he knew was guilty of certain crimes, or immoral in some capacity. And it's here that he began to ask himself a question that everyone in the legal world has asked themselves at one point in time. Am I doing the right thing? Truthfully, there's no concrete answer for such a question, and there never will be. Yet the internal turmoil and conflict that preceded are very much real, and something that my uncle experienced to a great degree. And it is because of this that we have that 69% statistic. So, how do we solve this issue? And how do we strike a balance between being a good lawyer and being a good person? It's simple. They don't. And instead, they just continue to endure this turmoil simply because they can't speak about it. But the negative impacts that are created by these legal systems aren't exactly confined to just impacting lawyers. In fact, I'd like you to think about a scenario for a little bit. Imagine you were in an environment where you had to be constantly exposed to graphic content, gory descriptions of violence, and even recounts of gruesome acts. I'd say with a hearty heart, welcome to the legal world. Whether you're a judge, a juror, a lawyer, a court bailiff, a witness, even a common observer like you and I, being in a criminal court often comes with a set of unstated and unspoken warnings and regulations. That being, you have to come to the terms with the fact that you're exposing yourself to highly traumatic information, photos, and even videos. The last time I went to visit my uncle, I wanted to ask him something, an interesting question. I wanted to know what was the worst thing he had seen in court. While he didn't give me a direct answer, his face has said it all. A bleak and emotionless expression. But his eyes were fixated towards the ground, and his hands were trembling. And I could see the visceral discomfort on his visage as I posed such a question. And once again, like always, he wasn't alone in experiencing this. In fact, according to the American Bar Association, in collaboration with the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation, it was found that 70% of lawyers reported experiencing trauma in their line of work. To top that off, the National Center for State Courts found that 23% of judges meet the criteria for PTSD, simply because of traumatic exposure. So it's evident that there is a problem with this pattern and this norm of traumatic exposure or exposure to traumatic information and content. But how do we solve such an issue? Can we solve such an issue? Well, it isn't as simple as simply preventing the exposure by barricading such graphic content. If we do so, we run the risk of obstructing the legal system's job of upholding an order in our society. Well, with that knowledge, what does this mean? And what does this mean in terms of what the problem actually is? Well, the truth is, this problem truly entails the legal system's failure to strike a balance between personal health and social justice. In fact, even in our daily lives, we often end up compromising one thing for the other. So, is it truly possible to reach a compromise of sorts? Of course it is. With everything else, there's always a compromise. Yet the steps to this aren't as easy as they may seem. So, how do we solve these problems? Well, simply just giving lawyers and other legal professionals with better resources and more mental health resources, that wouldn't be much of an effective solution, would it? No. In order to solve this problem, we must change our fundamental perception of the legal profession. Lawyers, like the rest of us, are humans. We're fragile, we're delicate, we're vulnerable, and we're prone to the same troubles as anyone else. And once we begin to realize this fact, we begin our first step in a long and tedious deconstruction of social stigma. However, it doesn't end there. This doesn't just mean educating more people and spreading awareness, because that wouldn't really do good, would it? It means taking an active role and extending our help to those who need it, and making sure that they can talk about their issues in a healthy and positive way. It means addressing that systemic fear instilled into legal professionals about talking about mental health, and telling them that showing your vulnerabilities and weaknesses is in no way a sign of incompetence or weakness. My uncle's mental health issues were synonymous with thousands of legal professionals, and possibly millions of more, who are still afraid to speak about it. We as a society must make sure that no one else suffers as he did in silence. Thank you.